Good morning. Time now a few minutes after 8 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo, Friday, January 21st, 2022. Welcome to another edition of the World Bank Tokyo office online morning seminar organized by the World Bank Tokyo office team. My name is Koichi Omori. I am a Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. This morning, we are featuring a new report titled Insect and Hydroponic Farming in Africa, the New Circular Food Economy. Connecting from Washington, we have Dorothee Werner, lead economist in agriculture and food global practice of the World Bank and lead author of the report. Good morning and good evening to you, Dorothee. How are you? Can you hear me?
Good evening from here, while it's good morning to you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful seminar series that you're organizing.
Great, thank you very much. Dorothee is a lead economist, but at the same time, she's a well-known photographer. We had a pleasure of hosting a photo exhibition in Tokyo and in Yokohama, featuring her photos, together with the photos taken by the legendary jazz musician Sadao Watanabe. This was held on the occasion of the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD 7, in 2019. Dorothee came to Tokyo and Yokohama in person, not only to launch the photo exhibition, but also to organize a TICAD side event on agriculture. In fact, TICAD 8 will be held in Tunisia this year. We would definitely like to feature more World Bank report on Africa in the morning seminar programs this year. We will listen to Dorothee's keynote presentation sharing the main point of the report. After her presentation, I'll read questions sent from our viewers. Please send more questions using online form posted on the announcement page of the seminar. And you can simply post your question on the chat section of the YouTube screen. I'll read your question and ask Dorothee to respond after her keynote presentation. With that, I'd like to ask Dorothee to come in formally to start your presentation. Over to you, Dorothee.
Thank you very much. Let me share the presentation. I'm sorry, it just disappeared.
Yeah, it's coming up.
I think it should be here now. And since we're all working from home, we all sometimes have a little bit of challenges with our heads. Let me take the boy away here so I don't get disturbed. Thank you very much. What if I told you that it's possible to feed all the people in the world with a nutrient-rich diet and not drain our planet, including for forest and biodiversity? And it may even be possible to feed nutritious food to the 10 billion people that will inhabit our planet by 2050. You may say it's a dream, but there are untapped potentials producing nutritious food that improve our food system by applying a circular economy concept that will first not take up more arable land and water, secondly, increase climate resilience by creating jobs, incomes, and producing low carbon intensive foods. The African food system cannot feed all people on the continent nutritious food right now. Since 2014, per capita food production has been falling in Africa. And in 2021, 240 million Africans experienced hunger, more in countries affected by fragility and conflict, the so-called FCV or FCS countries, where 29% right now have insufficient food consumption. With business as usual in sub-Saharan Africa, food security will deteriorate for at least a decade. New technologies are part of the solution to increase food security, in addition to better policies in Africa. Insect and hydroponic farming are such disruptive technologies. Insect and hydroponic farming are part of the promising menu of solutions to strengthen the food system by increasing the nutrient content in foods and decreasing the environmental impact on food and agriculture. Globally, we need to move away from the linear food production model and closer to a circular economy that will first strengthen the food system and feed more people nutritious food. Second, create climate resilient livelihoods and income from the farm and up the value chain. Thirdly, reduce the agricultural footprint on the planet. Insect and hydroponic farming technologies have a comparative cost advantage over conventional farming when resources are constrained. This is why these technologies can be successful in arid and densely populated areas, including in cities, where there's a shortage of arable land and often of water. This also explains why these technologies are economically advantageous in resource-poor communities in Africa. As we increase food security, we could expand the menu of food that are little resource intensive and nutritious. I have had the privilege to share protein-rich meals with people across the planet. The Zimbabweans told me to eat crunchy mopama worms. As a matter of fact, 90% of Zimbabweans eat insects. Koreans showed me that mealworm can spice up salads and serve as a key ingredient in desserts. Indians in Chhattisgarh shared their secrets when we cooked red weaver ants and enjoyed a meal with ant sauce. Ants are hard to catch, but trust me, they're even harder to prevent from running out of the pan when you're cooking them. The wonderful and amazing food culture in Japan is also on the world's insect and food map. Many Japanese friends have told me that they sometimes ate insects when they were kids. There are even some areas, for example, in Gifu and Nagano, that have a history of cooking with the insect. And you can eat them, the insect, in some restaurants in Japan. Food connectors, we all like to share a meal. Globally, 1 to 2 billion people eat insects across the globe, and they're mostly collected in the wild. And there's a market for insects. Insects are delicious and nutritious, like any meals that are prepared well, right? They are a source of high quality protein, and insects provide 9 digestible amino acids, in addition to zinc, iron, and calcium, all micronutrients that many children in Africa lack right now. Adding only 5 grams of insect protein per day to the diet can alleviate a person's risk of protein, folate, zinc, and B12 deficiency. 2 key risks with collecting insects in the wild. First, foraged insects are mostly seasonal. Mopama worm can be collected only 4 months per year in Southern Africa. Plus, there's a risk of over-harvesting these foraged insects, and that can reduce the biodiversity and the ecosystem services that insects provide. Right now, globally, 40% of insect species are at risk of extinction. Secondly, there's an issue with safety in consuming foraged insects. Insects collected in the wild, they eat off trees and crops, including those that have just been sprayed by pesticides. So insects may contain chemicals dangerous for human health. What if we could stop over-harvesting insects by producing them instead of collecting them in the wild, So by farming insect, we could both have an all year round supply and we can control what insects eat. So no dangerous chemicals enter into the food chain. We can rear insects like we raise other livestock. Clearly, cricket and mealworm can be categorized as micro livestock, right? But with 20 times fewer greenhouse gas emission than livestock per kilo of edible protein. Globally, we have about 2,100 edible insects, and Africans consume about 25% of these. But globally, we only farm 20 insect kinds. We collected data in 13 African countries on insect farming. And we learned that there exist roughly 850 insect farms right now in these 13 countries. And every year we see an increase in the number of new entrants and insect farming initiatives in Africa. Barclays Investment Bank estimates that the global market for insects, for human food and animal feed, will be worth up to $8 billion by 2030. That's less than a decade away. Okay, maybe not everybody wants to order a mealworm burger, but what if the animals people eat, such as chicken and fish, were fed their favorite food? Yes, feed with insect protein as the main protein source, instead of fish meal and soybean meal. Today, we feed fish to farmed fish, and then nearly a third of the global fish catch goes to feed farmed fish. That is unsustainable. And also, this problem with soybeans. They need a lot of arable land to grow, and we need to reduce the soy protein content in animal feed. If we reduce the soy content in animal feed, we could halt the deforestation of the remaining standing tropical forest. Insect farming can produce a lot of protein. Let me just give you an example. In 1 year, on 1 acre of black soldier fly farm, we can produce more protein than in 3,000 acres of land where we raise cattle, or 130 acres of where we grow soybean. Black soldier fly protein can substitute fish meal and soy, and it can even improve the growth performance of animals. This we have learned from the surveys in Africa. What does insect farming look like? Black soldier fly larvae can be produced in a short time, in colonies stacked vertically in crates or in pens with high population density. How long does it take to raise a chicken or produce a ton of soybean? That depends, but we know that black soldier fly larvae can be produced in 2 weeks with no arable land and little water. The demand for animal feed is rapidly increasing globally and in Africa, and so are prices for feed. In the last decade, just in Kenya, feed production tripled and reached 900,000 tons. 16 insect species are farmed in the 13 surveyed African countries. The 4 main ones are mealworm, crickets, palmweed larvae, and black soldier fly larvae. And 81% of the insect farmers in Africa produce insect for human consumption. What do insects eat? Insects can be fed organic waste, for example, household waste, agricultural waste, and food industry waste. The circular production process produces insect and frass, and frass is insect manure that can serve as a biofertilizer. Both the insect protein and the frass can be sold commercially. Insects provide protein and oil that we feed to people or to fish, chicken, and pigs that serve as food for people. We can create jobs along the chain. People buy food, and produce organic waste, which can be served to the insect. Voila, a circular economy. And insect farming can contribute to combat climate change and solve our waste problems by turning organic waste from a liability into an asset. Insect farming can help produce high level of organic waste, for example, in cities and in rural communities where waste collection is difficult and often costly and sometimes doesn't even happen. Some of the farmers in rural communities in Ghana mentioned that their rural communities have become cleaner since they started to produce the palm oil larvae, because people spent more time sorting their waste so nothing go to waste when it can be served to the insects. This figure shows a representation on the value and supply chain of edible insect farming. It is like that of many other animal protein that we produce, but it's new, so not all the components are fully developed and implemented, including the regulations. The development of insect production system and their cost are determined by several factors, depending on the scale of the operation. Costs are mainly determined by labor cost and the cost of substrate, and the substrate is what we feed to the insect. Small-scale insect farmers exist in parallel with large-scale commercial insect farmers in Africa. For example, in our survey, we found that 76% of the existing insect farmers are small, while only 4% are large and roughly 20% are medium scale. Our survey showed that insect farming benefits both youth, women, and men, and all ages. The insect farmers in Africa are 12% of the insect farmers are less than 30 years of age, so they are what we consider youth, and 22% are over 60 years of age. Insects have a ferocious appetite. 1 square meter of black soldier fly farm can consume up to 15 kilos of organic waste a day. Insects convert all sorts of organic waste into protein. Our survey findings reveal that nearly half of the insect farmers in Africa use household waste, such as vegetable scraps from the household as insect feed. Others use industrial food waste, for example, the waste from brewery that still have a good amount of insect or protein in it, with insect they like, and it's very good for their growth. In Africa, nearly half of insect farmers said that intergeneration is the main reason they engaged in insect farming. In Ghana, small palm oil farmers could pay back their initial capital in 127 days based on the first year of revenue of $563. Not many other new companies that I know of, people can pay back the initial investment in less than 6 months. So that's quite impressive what we're seeing. In Thailand, a small 8-pen cricket farm generates more than $2,000 in net profit from selling crickets and the frash every year. In our survey, all insect farmers experience an increase in consumer demand, and 59% of the insect farmers experience an increase in prices. 26% of the farmers experienced a 50% higher price than in the previous year. In most countries, insect protein is little competitive, but in Kenya, black soldier fly larvae prices are now below fish meal price and soybean price. So it's very promising for the Africa industry. So move and talk about what is the potential for insect farming in the continent. If we collect agricultural waste and feed If we collect agricultural waste and feed it to black soldier flies fed to animal, we create job and income, and we can reduce greenhouse gas emission. We did estimations based on the circular economy model. I'm really sorry. Excuse me for a second. So, based on our estimation on a circular economy model, we took the top 10 agricultural economies in Africa, and we assumed we could collect 30% of the agricultural waste from their 5 crops. If we do that, we would generate roughly 200 million tons of agricultural waste. This waste we can feed to black soldier fly larvae, and we would get 2 products. Remember I mentioned before the 2 key products are biofertilizer and the protein. So in terms of biofertilizers, we would get 60 million tons to a market value of $19 billion. And remember, we're feeding agricultural waste to black soldier fly larvae, and this is basically the value of the insect manure. They have a high, that is a really good one to improve the soil, including what the African soil really needs. Secondly, the black soldier fly larvae, when that is turned into feed, that will have a market value of $2.6 billion. This waste-based black soldier fly protein can meet 14% of the annual protein needs for all fish, chicken, goats, and pigs that is farmed right now in Africa. There are also socioeconomic benefits. We can create up to 15 million climate resilience, direct and indirect jobs on the continent. And finally, there are also climate benefits. We can reduce greenhouse gas emission. We can substitute the feed, the soy and the fish meal feed with black soldier fly larvae and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions with 86 million tons of CO2 equivalent emission. And that is roughly the same as taking 18 million cars off the road. That's a huge potential for insect farming in Africa. And there's a huge potential really from the world, as you can see from this circular economy model. So what are the ways forward to implement insect and hydroponic farming technologies in Africa? They're quite extensive. We propose to organize insect and hydroponic farming in 2 phases. A first phase where we establish and pilot insect and hydroponic farming, and a second phase where we take it to scale. The report provides ideas on how to do this. So let me summarize our main finding. With insect and hydroponic farming for human food and animal feed that require no arable land and little water, first, the food system becomes closer to a circular economy. Second, it improves the food system and feed more people a nutritious, protein-rich diet and reduce malnutrition. Third, it creates climate-resilient jobs and income from the farm and up the value chain. Fourth, contribute to reduce the agricultural footprint on the planet, including from soil degradation, climate change, deforestation, and biodiversity depletion. Fifth, we save hard currency by producing rather than importing protein and fertilizer. And I think our colleagues in the Ministry of Finance in Africa would like that. It is possible to feed all the people on the planet, but I'm not saying that all humans need to consume insects. Insects can be fed to livestock and fish that people eat. But If you have never eaten a dessert made of bee larvae and white chocolate, you have missed out. Before I finish, I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart my co-authors that have done the research and drafted text for this report, my manager have supported the journey, and the people around the world that have taught me a lot about insects. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dorte, for your keynote presentation, summarizing the main messages and point of the new report. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Before reading the questions from our viewers, let me ask several questions. Purely because I remember we talked a little bit about the element of the ideas described in the report when we met in Japan several years ago. So as a World Bank economist focusing on agriculture and food, what was your main motivation? What motivated you actually to think about possibility of the insect farming and then coming up as a report like this one?
There's a number of reasons. First of all, I have followed the global refugee crisis for a very long time. And I've spoken to refugees and photographed and interviewed them in nearly 30 countries. And one thing that sticks out pretty much for all refugees is they are some of the most food insecure people on the planet. And that is particularly the ones that are in developing countries. And remember, most of the refugees on the planet, they're actually living in the poorest countries. Not many people actually realize this. Secondly, I have lived in a number of arid areas and spent a lot of time there. For example, I lived in the northeast Brazil for 3 years, where there's very little water and very little arable land. And there's drought after drought after drought that force people that used to make their living in agriculture to move away and move to the cities. So finding a technology where people that live in these arid areas or live in cities or are on the move, something that doesn't require arable land and very much water, at the same time that has a kind of technology that's portable. So imagine if you knew how to implement these technologies and you knew how to grow hydroponic plants, vegetables, fruits, flowers, feed, all the things that you can do, or grow insects in a square meter of pen, you would be able to, it doesn't matter where you pretty much go. After where you are, you could restart. Conventional agriculture, you cannot do that because you need to rent land, buy land, have access to arable land to produce conventional crops. So that is my main motivation. And given that people and the poor and the most food insecure people on the planet is really what I care the most about, I felt that we need to come up with new technologies for them. So I started to look around. First of all, the hydroponic was a little bit of a no-brainer because when you start to look into how to grow plants where you don't need soil and you don't need arable land, it comes up that the Dutch, when they migrated from the Netherlands to the US, were doing it on their boats. And that's why a lot of the Dutch, they didn't get scurvy like many of the other Europeans they got on this journey because they never got the vitamins. So we did, when I worked in the Middle East and North Africa, we did a report on refugees and suggested that hydroponic could be a way for them to make a living. And what has happened since is that many international organizations, including the World Bank, WFP, UNHCR, have implemented hydroponics in refugee camp settlements. And remember that not all refugees live in camps, they live in settlements, they live in cities. So in these settlements where refugees are, now they grow a lot of crops. And they're used for food, but also to feed, as we have learned from WFP in West Africa. But one of the things that was lagging with this, and that was also very clear from photographing and talking to refugees, that they really lack protein. So figuring out what kind of protein you could produce fast when you don't have arable land, or when you walk around in cities in many places in Africa, for example in Dakar, you're surprised that there is goats and some have dogs that eat the waste in the streets. But they take a while to mature before you can sell them and actually make an income. So I was thinking, what is some of the fastest thing you can do? And it was because there was a lot of the talk from the fancy restaurants in the world, including Noma in Copenhagen, that were starting to serve insects, but they are foraged, right? So then I started to look into, could you actually farm these insects? And a few places they're trying really hard, a lot for feed and some places for food. And I can tell you, when I started to look around in the world on this, it was actually, I was just starting when I met you. And I was Googling away, and anybody that I talked to, doesn't matter what country I visited, I asked people. And I would like to say that one of the first meeting I had in Japan was with our friends in Nikon. And in our meeting, they told me that some of their staff were eating insect when they were kids, and others that I met, and there's actually been done a movie by some guys from Copenhagen where they have a part of the insect that people collect and consume in Japan. So bit by bit, and being in Korea, I was there to learn about the hydroponics, really. But then I asked them about what kind of insects that they grow. And remember that Asia has a strong tradition of raising insects, because they have the silkworm and they have the bees. But that's already the first kind of insect that has been farmed. And some of them we also know from in the Western world. But the other, for feed and really for food, in many other parts of the world is fairly new. But in Africa, it's not so new. It was new to me because I haven't paid enough attention traveling in Africa. Because when you start to pay attention by the side of the road, when insects are in season, people that collect insects, they would sell them. And very interesting, when we started to do surveys and learned about all these insect farm and what they're doing, many of them are really small. They're doing it next to something that they're also doing, because insect farming is not hard work. It's not like you have to be in the field all day and work the land. Insect farming, I would say on average, probably require 1 hour to 2 hours a day. So people can do other work or do other activities. So that's really a long answer to what motivates me. And I can tell you, as many of you listeners, it was a big surprise to me what the potentials are, as it was to you, I believe.
Thank you. Before reading a question, one more question from my side. The last 2 years, the entire world has been suffering from the COVID-19. This period seems to be overlapping the period where you spent most of your time to produce the report. So how did you encounter and then overcome the challenges during this period in order to produce this interesting report, particularly from the data collecting point of view? I'm sure, you are not able to visit, the field in the last perhaps 2 years. So, any experience you had during your production process?
I can tell you, I feel very privileged that I started this work in 2019 and not in 2020, because I managed to have a lot of meetings in African countries with researchers and producers and governments before, which meant that I could work with them while I was sitting at home like I am right now. So basically, we had researchers in Africa to help us do the field work collecting the data. And you know me, I would have loved to be there to learn and to document. But I hope that later on we'll be able to do that.
Thank you very much for your responses. So let me read the question that we received in advance from our viewers. Then ask the daughter to respond. The first question from Sasaki-san. Thank you for your question, as always. How does the World Bank promote and support insect farming within its program to help the developing countries' government? Would you please introduce examples, if any? Does IFC help the private sector in developing countries in this regard? Any comment, Lotte, please?
Yes. First of all, the World Bank are always looking to broaden the activities that we promote in order to increase food security and incomes around the world. And insect farming is new. So for us, we are right now starting to do pilots in 4 African countries. So the World Bank in insect farming can do knowledge work like we are doing right now. We're sharing the knowledge, document like we did in this report that you can all download. It's online. There's an executive summary, there's an overview, and there's a full report. So these are the knowledge products. Then, every time you're starting something new, governments, they need policies and regulations, like I showed. And not all these are in place everywhere. Most countries actually don't have a framework for farming insects. So this is being developed. And this is also something that the World Bank can help with. Sometimes, in terms of policies, the World Bank gives policy loans to government in order to speed this process up. And finally, the third area is we finance investment projects. So governments can borrow from the World Bank to implement insect projects that can include everything from research, development, training, financing of the farmers, creating associations, and anything that you can imagine that the industry would need, because the insect farming, the whole value chain is new. Think about the main protein, the main animals that people eat. I think I would be hardly pressed to calculate more than roughly 25 animals. So imagine most of these animals like chickens and pigs and cows, research have been done to improve their productivity for decades now. These insects, a lot of things we don't know. We still have to do the research and do the regulatory framework in order to what we can feed, how we can eat, what we can feed to animals, and so on and so forth. And this is all the 3 areas that the World Bank have the strongest comparative advantage.
Thank you for your responses. Let me continue reading the questions from the Sasaki-san. We have one more question from the same person. In Japan, hydroponic farming is emerging as an innovative way, and vegetables produced in this way have higher prices at the market in some cases. On the other hand, insect farming is not well received culturally, and it may not easily become part of daily life in Japan. There may be some developing countries where people may not eat insects or may not easily adapt themselves to eating insects. Any suggestions to such situations? And then there is another person, the anonymous participant, who sent the similar culture-related question. So let me continue to read, then ask you to respond all together. A question is this: how do you combine and adapt a food security policy into different lifestyles and habits, such as those of the indigenous people? I would like to ask the daughter to come in to respond to those questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me start with the hydroponic crops. what we're seeing in many places is that hydroponic lettuce, for example, they do fetch a higher price. But it also sometimes has to do with the fact that when for example, a restaurant, they get delivered hydroponics directly in the morning from the farm that have harvested right then. And when you're having lunch, you're eating a hydroponic salad, maybe. Given that the nutrients are higher at that point, that means that it creates more value for the restaurant to serve such a fresh one. Therefore, the prices are higher in some cases, right? This is also the case for insect. But let me start by talking about the culture, because this is actually a question that had come up a lot. Let me step back and share with you some anecdotes before I get into talking about the insect. A few hundred years back, when there was no railroad in the United States, in Massachusetts, lobster was given only to prisoners and to slaves. So that was what they ate. And there was actually a prison uproar in 1773, I think it was, where the prisoners said they only wanted lobster 3 times a week. Then came the railroad, and some smart people in communication in Massachusetts realized that they could sell lobster as a high protein across the United States. And today, at Christmas, I was actually up in Boston. I went to a store. The price of a pound of lobster was $52. Okay, so that is probably the highest price of among the highest price of any protein that exists. The second example I would like to give is potatoes. In Europe, in France, Marie Antoinette got some seedlings from South America, planted them, and she put guards around her field, around the field of potatoes, basically to show people this has value, and that's why I'm protecting it. Because everybody realized it had value, people started to like potatoes. And today, and for the last few hundred years, potato has been the key staple of food. So why am I giving you these stories and anecdotes? It is because that the world is also changing. When I share chips with protein, with insect protein such as crickets, some of the kids of my friends, they love it. They understand that you need to be strong to play soccer and do sports. So they say, this is cool. But when I give it to my friends and older people, they say, no, we don't like this so much. So for me, it's not about convincing people to eat insects, not at all. Let the 1 to 2 billion people that eat insects already, let them have access to some that are healthy and doesn't have dangerous chemicals, and some that are actually produced and not collected in the wild, so we don't run down our ecosystem and over-harvest insects in the wild. Secondly, so most people on the planet, they don't really know what the chickens, the pigs, and other animals that they eat, what they have been fed. And we know that free-ranging chickens and pigs, if they can get away with it, they will grab some of the insects in the ground. So the insect have already been eaten by the chickens. So what if we fed insect larvae to the chicken and the pigs and the fish? given that these animals, they love the insect already. And what we have learned from our research in Africa is that, for example, pigs that have been fed by black soldier fly larvae, they grow faster, so that farmers can take them to market faster, and they can have, in a year, they can have more cycles of pigs. That's the first thing that is really advantageous. The second thing is that when the farmers take the pigs to market, they get a higher price, because these insect-eating pigs, they have more meat, they're leaner, and they have broader shoulders. So they have been getting a price that's more than double as high. So you can imagine this goes like hotcake in these communities where they have access to the insects. And farmers, they learn from each other, and the demand is really, really high right now. That we learn from the insect farmers that we're working with. And one of my favorites one is Talash, a 23-year-old insect farmer in Kenya that's already producing enough both to sell to the feed companies and to the farmers in the community. So when you had a question about the vulnerable people, and some other really vulnerable people are indigenous people on the planet, because they have a long tradition of living with the environment and guarding the environmental service that the environment provides for the planet, including insects. So many indigenous people have been eating insects for thousands of years. And many people that are not indigenous have also been eating insects for thousands of years. And it has mainly been women that have been collecting the insects, while men, they go and hunt for bigger game. So in terms of food security, remember how I told you it was super nutritious, had all the 9 amino acids, had zinc, calcium, and iron. So the indigenous people, they have known this, and they have been teaching us a lot about the value of eating insects. I'm not saying that they have to produce insects, because they know not to over-harvest insects. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, can you please answer it again? Ask the question again.
Yeah, thank you. I think you addressed the some of the points already in your responses. So let me continue reading the further question, more questions actually. We received several questions during your presentation. So let me read those questions. First one, questions or comment actually from Professor Yoshino of Keio University. Thank you for your excellent presentation. In Japan, we eat grasshoppers. I agree, not only Africa, but also advanced nations should eat insects by reducing beef and other consumptions. It would be a good idea to have worldwide competition in better dishes using insects, which would promote the insect dishes all over the world. So he's proposing perhaps, Dorothy, you may want to organize a world competition of the insect dishes at some point to promote the insect, eating insect habit and as a potential way. So that's the interesting proposal.
That is an excellent idea. I love the idea.
All right, great. And then let me continue reading the question posted on the chat section of the YouTube screen. This is a question from Dr. Tatsuya Shimizu of the Institute of Development Economies of JETRO. Thank you very much for the interesting talk and beautiful pictures. To produce insects on a large scale, do we need to consider the negative environmental impact? So that was the question. So if you want to respond to his question, and also probably comment made by Professor Yoshino on the competition, Dorothy, please.
First of all, most of the farmed insects that we have been looking at, they actually exist in the wild already. So everything from black soldier fly to house flies, etc., they exist already. And given the very short lifespan of these insects, one thing I learned about the black soldier flies is that after the maggot turns into a black soldier fly, they stop eating. Adults do not eat. So basically, they die very fast thereafter. So it's a maggot for about 10 to 14 days that eat. So there are very little in terms that we have to worry about spreading diseases like we know from other animals. So that is one environmental impact and human impact that's important. In terms of environmental impact of producing, compared to producing other animals, the CO2 emissions from insects are next to nothing. Water consumption is next to nothing. So I mean, it's basically, if you compare it to nothing, yes, there is a little, but given you compare to what we already know in terms of the 20-25 animals that we farm already, these are very little. And of course, if we could stop eating bigger animals like the pig, the chickens, and the cows, we would not need necessarily to farm the larvae. We could farm insects only for food, such as the crickets and the palmwheel larvae, grasshoppers that you mentioned in Japan. So this is the main thing I would say to the professor.
Thank you for your responses. So before wrapping up the seminar, as you already responded to the question that we received from viewers, any final words from you? But also, it'd be great if you can talk a little bit about your next plans. Plans after you produce these interesting reports. What's on your plate next, and then that would be great if you could talk about it. Thank you.
So, what is next, and what we're actually starting already, is to look into how to start insect farming in some countries in Africa, and even take it to scale in Zimbabwe. So we're talking about, for example, to do it in the area around the Harare, the capital, and collect a lot of the organic waste from the city. So we could use that to feed black soldier fly larvae that would then be fed to all the farmers' chickens. And we believe now that we can actually produce enough feed to feed all the chickens in the area around Harare. And one thing that's very important to remember in Africa, it's not only COVID that have affected production in Africa. We still have a lot of climate issues. We have droughts, we have floods, we have value chain issues, and there's also countries that really lack the hard currency to import enough feed for animals. So by producing it, we create job and income, and we don't have to import the feed. So we can avoid killing and seeing so many animals dying during extreme events, like in situations when there's not enough feed in Africa. So that's very important. So we'll be starting in Zimbabwe, in different areas, including in refugees and host communities, because in Tongaga refugee camp, for example, they have chickens and other animals, and the host communities, they have animals that also need feed, and they have in the area a good amount of agricultural waste we can use as feed for the animals. And we talk about starting in Malawi, in Kenya, and also in South Sudan. So these are sort of the next step. But given that the report was launched yesterday, we have received a lot of interest from different people across the globe, including from the Caribbean islands. They have small islands, they have waste problems, and they also lack feed to their chickens and animals. So they are interested. Cote d'Ivoire has written, Namibia has written, Botswana. I mean, a lot of interest, and it's really, really fascinating. I look forward to the ride, and I cannot, at this point, tell us where we're going to end, but I'm convinced that it's going to be fun.
Great, thank you very much. Lotte, as you are speaking, we received one more question from our viewers. So let me read and ask you to quickly respond. This is a question from Professor Shimamoto in Kyoto. What will be the main obstacles, if any, in bringing this grand project on the ground? This is a question. And then I would like to ask you to make a brief comment, and then we wrap up. Thank you.
The challenge right now is that we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's very hard to implement projects sitting in my little office and trying to figure out to mobilize all the people in the countries to get them together. In normal times, I would have traveled there and talked to researchers, government, industry organization, farmers, and figure it out how best to do that. Now things take us a little bit longer time because we're sitting here. I believe this is probably easiest form of farming that can be started, given that you really almost only need some plastic buckets and a pen. You need some eggs, and then you're good to go, and some waste. It's too good to be true, honestly.
Thank you very much. This morning, we had a pleasure of having Lotte Werner, lead economist in agriculture and food global practice of the World Bank, connecting from Washington, D.C. Lotte, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to all your audience for all your questions and for spending your morning with us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will have more interesting online seminars coming up. Please check our website for the latest information. With that, I'd like to say have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time. Thank you very much.